Just like the Battle of Culloden, Scotland is battling England for its freedom. But this time, its freedom is of another sort, the rights of transgender people. In January, Scotland introduced a law allowing gender self-identification without a medical note, making it easier for transgender people to transition. However, this was overruled by the English Parliament, claiming it violated some British laws. But the debate over transgender self-determination was put in the spotlight once again as transgender prisoner Isla Bryson, who was jailed for sexual crimes before her transition, was initially put in a women's prison. Due to outcry and fears over the safety of fellow inmates, she was moved into a men's jail, and the process of putting trans women in female prisons was put on hold. Does this show that although the gender identification bill may have been made with good intentions, it is flawed as people can distort it to take advantage of it? Is it not a basic human right for people to identify with the socially constructed gender that they want? Do trans rights infringe on women's rights? How will history view this debate? Should transgender offenders choose where they're imprisoned?
Okay, so let's get to it. Should the transgender offenders choose where they're imprisoned? As always, As always, we begin with our quick fire round, 30 seconds each to lay out your initial stance on the matter, and we'll pick up the conversation now from there. So, Miss India Willoughby, please take the lead. Your 30 seconds are on.
Yeah, I would say that nobody should be able to choose which prison that they actually go in. That is a matter for the state, but everyone should be respected, and where you go is dependent on how much of a risk you are. Just to clarify the points there, this person wasn't actually put in a women's prison. They were put in solitary, a wing at a women's prison, so they were not mixing with the prisoners. Lots of countries have self-ID, no examples whatsoever of anyone going into a British prison who is a risk to women.
Yeah, wow. So punctuate. Just stopped with the ding. We never had that before. Thank you, Miss India Willoughby. Kate Coleman, your 30 seconds are on.
Hi, absolutely not. We know that sex is the most important factor when it comes to offending and to risk. Gender identity is irrelevant. Policy, practice and legislation must be on the basis of facts, not feelings. An allocation to the male or female prison estate must be on the basis of biological sex registered at birth. No exceptions.
And last but not least, Adam Scott Bellis, your take?
I would say that anything that could put anybody at risk for sexual assault in prison, where most sexual assaults do occur in this world, needs to be taken into account. I don't believe that we should be legislating or have legislation that has anything to do with somebody's feelings, but it's quite clear if somebody's a post-op transgender, transitioned woman that has not had any type of sexual violence towards women prior to their transition, I don't see why they shouldn't be allowed to stay in a women's prison.
Okay, and on that note, let's feel free to interact with one another from this point onwards. And the very intuitive, simple question is, are people simply taking advantage, abusing the gender identification bill? Kate?
Well, I think we need to get away from this question, which everybody seems to be struggling over, which is if only we could somehow weed out the genuine trans people and exclude, the fakers, somehow everything would be okay. It's not about being trans. It is nothing to do with being trans. It is about being male.
But isn't that why this is handled on an individual basis?
Being male. Sorry, what was that?
Isn't that why all these cases are being handled on an individual basis? Like, I understand a lot of what you're saying, and I agreed with some of the things that you said.
They're still male. You cannot assess on an individual basis whether somebody is male or is not male.
Listen,
male.
I'm sorry, but
case by case
right, but if you've transitioned and you've had some type of surgery and you identify as a Well, if you've had surgery to remove your penis, then you're not a man. So I agree with you. We don't need pre-transitioned men inside of women's prisons. We don't need pre-transitioned. We don't need pre-transitioned men inside of women's locker rooms.
To complete one sentence.
No, you are mistaken that a post-surgical trans woman who is still a man and still maintains a male pattern of risk and offending. There is research which which proves that. Yes, there is India.
Not true. No, there isn't. I'm sorry.
Risk of offending?
Let's allow India, please, to chime in. Yes.
I haven't finished my point about post-surgery.
Well, I think you've had a long blast there with no interruption.
English prisons at the moment.
We really want to hear all of you, and I promise you will all get your time to speak your mind. India, please.
Thank you so much. Well, we've just seen a great example there of the fact that as far as the gender critical movement are concerned, there is nothing that trans people can do or any evidence. It's just a blank no, regardless of facts or whatever. These are just excuses. And the point I was making on my intro there is that there are 20 countries now that have self-ID around the world.
Finland, by the way, joining today. Just a quick note, yeah.
Yeah, there's no recorded wave of predators who can just offend as a predator. They don't need to register and become transgender to attack women. There's no incidents in the UK of any attacks by transgender prisoners who are put through, who are self-IDing. So it's just an absolute load of rubbish. And to be honest, it's more like a religion now. With the gender critical movement, they are just besotted with people's genitals, and that's what they're obsessed with.
I mean, I think this is why that it's meant to be handled on an individual basis, and I think that's very important to acknowledge here. There are obviously people that have transitioned and gone through surgery and have changed their entire life. There are obviously people who have not done that. There are people who abuse the system. There are people who don't abuse the system. This is a global thing. It's not like it's just in England. It's not like it's just the United States. You know, Israel was the very first army to allow transgender soldiers.
Right.
So, you know, I think it's a fairly obvious thing, you know, to discriminate against transgender you know, transgender individuals is no better than being a Nazi, because they did exactly that.
Okay.
But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that there are people that do abuse this system. There are biological men pretending to be women in order to assault other women.
But you know, haters gonna hate, etc. You can. The question being, if you can make.
Can I just say?
Yes,
sorry,
Kate, please, Kate.
As a Jew on an Israeli TV channel, to be likened to a Nazi, I find absolutely disgusting.
No.
I didn't liken you to a Nazi. That's not what I said at all. Excuse me. That's not what I said. Nobody called you a Nazi. Please don't put words in my mouth. No, there's no attitude. You're
by discriminating.
You're literally putting words.
Let's refrain from using such inflammatory rhetoric and unnecessary to make a point.
It's ridiculous. I didn't make that statement.
Please, let's
please make a point.
Of course, Kate, the floor is yours. The floor is yours, Kate.
Please, thank you.
Wow.
Just because you said the word, not me.
Well, I mean, I was referring to the historical fact that the National Socialist Party was discriminatory towards transgenders and put them in Holocaust camps.
You made an analogy.
Do you want to debate what I said, or do you want to debate the merit of this argument? Because you can continue to buy time with
dearest Kate, please let's try to go back to the topic of our.
Sorry. My third point. Am I able to continue making my first point, please?
Kate, the floor is all yours.
The 2011 Swedish study, which looked at post-operative transgender women who had a diagnosis of gender identity disorder, found that there was absolutely no departure from male patterns of criminality and risk, including when it came to violent offending. I haven't finished my point.
Miss Willoughby, please let's.
I'm just going to hang up. There's no point. Do you want to?
The report's authors.
Miss Willoughby, please. I promise you. Let's allow Kate to conclude her argument, and we are adding right to you. Yes.
Right. I'm the national expert on this issue in the UK. Do you want to hear from me or not?
Yes, we do. No, we do.
So please. On this in the UK, you're not. I'm probably the leading trans figure in the UK on this. And the report by Dejan, who actually wrote the study that you're referring to, has come out and says it is an abuse and a mangling of the statistics to suggest that in some way that transgender people are genetically programmed to be high-risk offenders.
I haven't said genetically programmed.
I mean, that's very similar to how I did not call you a Nazi, but, you know.
As the male population. I haven't said genetically programmed.
I'm sorry. That is
I haven't said genetically programmed.
I suggest that we allow each other to speak, and then we will not have the need to correct one another. Yes. Okay.
I know of 2 post-operative male prisoners in the female estate at the moment who still manage to sexually assault women in prison.
Okay. And
one is there on a serious violent offence. And one,
who are they?
I'm not going to name names on this television programme. No, they're not spaghetti monster
on the moon.
Okay, Ms. Willoughby, allow me to...
What do you say to the MOJ rate, which shows that 60% of trans women have at least one in prison, have at least one conviction for a sexual assault?
Again, this is the gender critical movement.
It doesn't. That's from the MOJ. Those are the MOJ.
I'm sorry, it doesn't come from the MOJ. It's an MOJ statistic that you have manipulated. You only looked at people who were serving long-term sentences.
I think the original question was should prisoners
be serving long-term sentences, which means that it's bigger crimes. It's just, you cannot talk, if somebody's just going to lie through their teeth in a very Trumptonian manner and tell the most exaggerated allegations, how can you combat that? I'm telling you to go and have a look at the person who authored this report originally, Dejan, who has dismissed exactly what you're claiming there, saying it's not true. So what do you say to the author then?
I'm saying that you're telling me that I'm manipulating the MOJ statistics, which I'm not.
What? You're quoting
Go and look at Hansard.
I'm telling you, the author of that report says you are wrong. So what do you say to the report's author?
I say that I've looked at the primary data that were collected and presented in that paper, and I'm afraid the analysis still adds up.
Okay.
So the person who did the study is wrong to say that you're wrong.
Okay, Adam, in the 30 seconds we have left to conclude this part of our discussion, wrap it up for us swiftly if you can, and we will keep on going from there.
I mean, like, I've just never experienced a situation where a conversation literally can't be had. But
come on, we've seen worse.
We've seen worse.
Okay.
We've seen worse. But
that was interesting. We need to maintain the standards, and hopefully we will all take a deep breath, because we really do want to hear all of you on this important topic. So we are taking a few minutes break, but we're back with all 3 of you and the rest of our fascinating discussion. Hopefully we'll be able to listen more and educate ourselves. Miss India will be Kate Coleman and Adam Scott Ballas. You're staying with us. A few minutes break, and we're back. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Kate Coleman, Adam Scott Ballas, and of course, Miss India Willoughby. Thank you all so very much for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, of course, but before we get back to our conversation, hopefully, the issue of trans rights have been topping the agenda in the United Kingdom, but not so much because of trans rights necessarily, but more because of the not so United Kingdom. So let's take a listen and pick up from there.
In my view, there are no grounds to challenge this legislation. It is within the competence of the Scottish Parliament. It doesn't affect the operation of the Equality Act, and it was passed by an overwhelming majority of the Scottish Parliament after very lengthy and very intense scrutiny by MSPs of all parties represented in the Parliament. So if there is a decision to challenge, then in my view it will be quite simply a political decision, and I think it will be using trans people, already one of the most vulnerable, stigmatised groups in our society, as a political weapon, and I think that will be unconscionable and indefensible and really quite disgraceful.
So let's get to it. Another quick fire round, 30 seconds each. Are trans people being used as political pawns? Adam, take the lead, please.
I'm just going to be very quick and say that I personally feel that there are a number of people that use the trans issue, the issue itself, not people, as a political tool. And I think that's very clear on both sides of the aisle. I think there are people that are abusing, the forward movement of trans rights. I think there are people that are discriminating against, trans people in a way that's totally inappropriate because of a lack of knowledge and ignorance. But at the same time, there are people that are pretending to be something that they're not in some cases.
Okay, Kate Coleman, your take?
Well, I think prisoners and I think also transgender prisoners are being used as ideological pawns.
That wasn't the question.
Adam, let Kate speak, please. Yeah.
I'll just stop.
No, Kate, please, the floor is yours.
Right. Can I please continue?
Yes, Kate, the floor is yours.
I think they're being used, and I'm not stopping when the bell rings.
Go on.
I think that prisoners, and I think that both female prisoners and transgender prisoners are being used as political and ideological pawns in this. When these policies properly implemented, as people like India would have them implemented, we see that transgender prisoners really suffer an extreme detriment due to the use of segregation, restriction, and supervision that become necessary purely because we are trying to pretend that sex doesn't matter.
Okay,
ding, ding.
Yes, Miss India, the floor is yours.
Yeah. And so my 30 seconds, I would just say that bad apples exist in all walks of life. You get bad trans people, bad Jews, bad Christians, and they all deserve to go to jail, and they all deserve to be punished in some way. But to brand whole groups, whole demographics as being, more dangerous or more suspicious or to be treated with more contempt than others is just clearly wrong. And we live in a civilized world. And that's why transgender people, good people like me, should be treated as a civil human being.
Well, no doubt about that. And if there is any doubt, then we don't want to hear it. Ms. Willoughby, let's continue from that point. Is it all just part, another episode of the culture war between conservatives and progressive, or is it an issue of human rights?
It's both of those things. I mean, certainly in the UK, the Conservative government are definitely using trans people as their battering ram for the next general election. On your intro, you heard the Tories are now 20% behind in the polls. They have nothing to offer financially. The cupboard is bare. All they have is what we call over here the war on woke. And at the front of that is the transgender thing. And they've co-opted into the gender critical movement, which is supported by the likes of Putin and Donald Trump, which gives you a clue of the type of background that they're coming from. And it's generally, a progressive argument where you've got the 20 countries. It's growing all around the world. Transgender people are starting to be accepted. But all you hear from the opposite side is it's essentially a rerun of the 80s and the anti-gay stuff.
Well, I mean, I think there is something to say about forcing people who maybe are unfamiliar with transgender people to, call them by certain pronouns, even if they're unfamiliar with that new becoming social norm. And there is, in many respects, sometimes people do feel that certain things are being thrust on them in a very forceful way, which actually, in my opinion, takes away from the progress that the transgender movement has made. Like you said in your earlier statement, there are good people, there are bad people in all walks of life, in all demographics, in all minorities and majorities. So, I do think there is a little bit of a middle ground there. There is a huge change in civil society right now, because what's really happening is a third gender is beginning to emerge and beginning to have a voice, which is not the cisgender male or female. It's people that identify as either asexual, transgender, or something else, or LGBTQIA.
How can somewhat of a binary society handles the non-binary?
We've always had outliers.
Kate.
Kate, please. No, please, Adam, go on.
You're more than welcome to take the question.
You were in the middle of your
I was raised by a lady. She taught me to be a gentleman. No, please.
Really? What we are doing here is that we are trying to falsely pretend that sex doesn't matter. India, you don't have any fewer rights in the democratic society that we live in than I do. Nobody has taken any rights away from trans people who claim to have a transgender identity.
No, India, please, let's allow Kate to speak.
What you are doing is demanding that on the basis of your feelings and your gender identity, that you should have rights and opportunities that women have. Male prisoners should not have the right to be held in a female prison. That should be an absolute. You know, I know you'll start saying, well, I'm talking about spaghetti monsters and I'm making things up and I'm lying and, I'm in league with Putin or Trump or whoever it is, but it doesn't matter because what I'm saying is the truth. The prisoners who are currently held in the female estate who are of the male sex include those convicted of rape, child sexual offences, murder, torture and violent assault. It also includes those with intact male genitalia. Right? The majority, as you will know, India, the majority...
Then what is that? But then you're proving the point.
Sorry, what is there?
I'm so confused. You just literally named all of the bad types of people in this world. They should be put... The state should be able to decide where those people are put into prison. Obviously, those are the cases. That's why this whole thing is a story, because there is a specific outlying individual... I mean, it's just not the same.
Yes, Kate, it's about being of the male sex. Okay. If you are a woman and you're convicted of murder or torture or a violent assault,
India, let's allow India to speak now, please. India. Sorry, Adam. India.
I'm done. You know what? I'm done. This has been a blast, but it's absolutely
Kate,
wow, you have been so rude to both of us this entire time, and now you're being rude to the show. And you took my words and spun them out, and now she hung up.
We lost Kate.
That was one of the most uncouth things I have ever seen on live television.
Yeah. Okay, India, wrap it up for us if you may.
Yeah. Well, look. Let's make no bones about it. I'm definitely not defending any bad trans people. Trans people should absolutely be punished. But if we're living in a civilized world, and trans people have existed time immemorial, every culture all around the world, we're a real thing, and some of us transition and we become women, some of us transition, we become men, some feel more comfortable in between. And I cannot believe that in 2023, with all the knowledge that we now have, that society cannot find room for 0.5% of the world's population.
Well, Miss India Willoughby, Adam Scott Bellis, and also Kate Coleman, thank you so much for this. It was definitely heated and over-emotional, but important nonetheless.